I grew up in the countryside of southern Ohio, in a place where the nights were so quiet you could hear the distant hum of a tractor from miles away. My family lived in a small farmhouse that sat alone, surrounded by acres of cornfields and patches of dense woods. It wasn't the kind of place where much happened. Most nights were calm, just the sound of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, and the rustling of wind through the crops. But that silence also meant that when something broke it, you noticed. And one night, in the fall of 2015, I noticed. I was 17 at the time, a high school senior who spent most nights either buried in homework or wasting time online. That night, I was sitting in the living room scrolling through my phone while my parents slept upstairs. It was close to midnight when I heard something that made me set my phone down. Footsteps. At first, I brushed it off. We had raccoons, coyotes, even the occasional deer that wandered too close to the house. But these didn't sound like animal steps. They were slow, heavy, too deliberate. The sound came from outside, near the gravel path that ran beside our house. I leaned over and peered through the window, my heart thumping louder with each second. The yard was dimly lit by the porch light, and beyond that, just pitch black. That's when I saw it. A man. He was standing just at the edge of the light, in the field. He wasn't moving, just standing there facing the house. At first, I thought it had to be one of our neighbors. But no one in our area came wandering around at midnight, and definitely not standing in silence like that. I froze, staring, and he just stood there like a dark figure carved out of the night. My mouth went dry. I remember whispering to myself, "Dad." But I couldn't even bring myself to call out louder. The man shifted slightly, and the light caught just enough of his face for me to see that he was older, maybe in his 40s or 50s, with messy hair and what looked like a torn jacket. He looked wrong, like he didn't belong there or anywhere. I reached for the phone on the couch to call my dad down, but when I looked back, he was gone, not walking away, not fading into the dark, just gone. My chest tightened, and I pressed myself against the glass, scanning the yard and the fields beyond. Nothing, just empty space and the sound of my own breathing. I finally shook myself out of the frozen panic and rushed upstairs. My dad woke up annoyed, but when I told him, his face grew serious fast. He grabbed his shotgun from the closet and went out onto the porch. I followed, clinging to the doorway, my eyes darting everywhere. The night was quiet again. Too quiet. Dad swept the yard with a flashlight, but there was nothing. No footprints in the gravel, no broken stalks in the field, no sound of someone retreating into the woods. We stayed outside for almost 15 minutes, waiting, watching, but it was like whoever, or whatever, I saw had just disappeared into thin air. My dad tried to calm me down, saying maybe I was tired. Maybe I imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. I could still see him in my head, standing in that half-light, staring at our house. I barely slept that night. Every little creak of the old farmhouse made me sit up and hold my breath. The next morning, my dad admitted he didn't think I imagined it. He'd found something strange near the edge of the field. Just under the tree line were cigarette butts, a half-empty water bottle, and what looked like a piece of cloth torn from a jacket. Someone had been out there, watching. And when I thought about how long he might have been standing just outside the windows, maybe even nights before that, my skin crawled. That was only the beginning, because over the next week, things escalated in a way that made me realize that man wasn't just passing through. He was waiting. For the first couple of days after I saw him, I tried convincing myself that maybe it had just been some random drifter cutting across the fields. People sometimes got lost. Maybe he just wandered too close to our property. But the things that happened next made that theory impossible. It started on the third night. I was in my room, sitting at my desk with my earbuds in, when I noticed a flickering light outside. I pulled the earbuds out, leaned toward the window, and saw it. Something shining in the field. At first I thought it was a flashlight, but when it moved I realized it wasn't someone searching. It was someone signaling. 3 flashes, a pause, 3 flashes again. The beam came from the edge of the woods, right where the cigarette butts and torn cloth had been found. I froze, my stomach dropping like I just missed a step on the stairs. Whoever it was, they weren't wandering. They were deliberately trying to get someone's attention. I bolted downstairs to get my dad. By the time we both ran outside, the light had stopped. The night swallowed everything again, leaving only the whispering cornfields. Dad yelled out into the dark, his voice echoing across the empty fields, but no one answered. That was the first real argument between us about calling the sheriff. I wanted to. I was terrified. But Dad was stubborn. "Out here, if you call them for every trespasser, they'll stop taking you seriously," he said. "Let me handle it." But Dad didn't know what it felt like, lying awake in my bed, staring out the window, knowing someone was out there watching. The next incident was worse. A week after the light, I was alone in the living room while my parents were at a late church meeting. I heard something that made me freeze mid-step. The screen door creaked. I knew that sound. The metal screen door on the back porch always made a distinct squeal when you opened it. My blood ran cold. I grabbed the poker from the fireplace and stood behind the couch, staring at the kitchen doorway that led to the back porch. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would give me away. Then, footsteps inside the house. Slow, heavy. The same deliberate rhythm I'd heard that very first night. I wanted to scream, but I was too scared. The footsteps creaked across the old wood floor of the kitchen, moving closer. And then, silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I stood there gripping the poker so tight my knuckles ached. I waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing. I finally forced myself to peek around the corner into the kitchen. The back door was closed. No one was there. But the mud on the floor told me I wasn't crazy. Wet, dark footprints trailed across the kitchen tile before stopping, halfway across the room. They didn't go back to the door. They just stopped. When my parents came home, Dad searched the house from top to bottom. Every door was locked, every window latched. But those footprints were real. Too real. That night, Mom finally insisted we call the sheriff. The deputy who came out was polite, but I could tell he thought I was being dramatic. He walked through the kitchen, shined his flashlight on the footprints, and muttered something about probably just a kid messing around. He promised to keep an eye on the area, but left not long after. It didn't make me feel any safer. 2 nights later, I woke up at around 3 a.m. I don't know why. I didn't hear anything, at least not at first. But something pulled me out of sleep, and as I blinked my eyes open, I realized I was staring at my window. And someone was staring back. His face was pressed against the glass, fogging it with each breath. His eyes were wide, wild, and fixed directly on me. I screamed. The sound jolted my parents awake, and within seconds Dad was thundering up the stairs with his shotgun. By the time he burst into my room, the man was gone. We searched the yard with flashlights, my dad's gun ready, but the only thing we found was a single handprint smudged on the outside of my window. That was the night everything changed. Mom demanded we stay somewhere else until things settled down, maybe with my aunt in town. But Dad refused, saying he wasn't about to let some creep scare us out of our own home. For a while, nothing happened. Weeks went by with no sign of him, and slowly, I started to believe it was over. I tried to convince myself that maybe the guy was just passing through after all, and for whatever reason, decided to mess with us. Until the last night. It was early November, and the harvest had just ended. Most of the corn had been cut down, leaving wide open fields. That night, I was in bed, almost asleep, when I heard it. Knocking. Not on the door. On the glass. 3 sharp taps on my window. I bolted upright, heart hammering, and there he was. Standing outside in the open, nothing to hide him anymore. He didn't move this time. He didn't try to run. He just stood there with his head tilted slightly, like he was studying me. I screamed for my dad, and before I could blink, the man lifted something and placed it against the glass. A note. Scrawled in messy, jagged handwriting were 4 words. "I've been waiting here." By the time my dad ran into the room with his shotgun, the man was already sprinting across the open field, disappearing into the tree line. The sheriff's department searched the woods the next day but found nothing. No camp, no signs, no man. Just empty forest. We never saw him again. But to this day, every time I walk past a window at night, I half expect to see that face staring back at me, fogging up the glass. There's something about the countryside at night that makes every sound sharper. Every creak, every rustle of the wind through the fields feels heavier. When I was younger, I used to brush it off as imagination. But what happened at that old farmhouse proved it wasn't all in my head. The farmhouse sat about a mile down the road from my grandparents' place. It had been abandoned for decades, with its roof caved in on one side and weeds clawing their way up the siding. People around town called it the Hollow House. Nobody lived there, and nobody wanted to. I was 16 when my cousin Jared dared me to go inside one night. It was October, right after harvest season, and the air was already biting cold. The two of us had been hanging out in my grandparents' barn, swapping ghost stories, when Jared brought it up. "You know, people say lights come on in that place sometimes," he said. "Bet you won't last 10 minutes in there." Of course, I couldn't back down. That is how I ended up trudging across the overgrown path leading to the Hollow House with just a flashlight and Jared tagging behind me. Even from the outside, the house looked wrong. The windows were all broken, jagged shards still clinging to the frames like rotten teeth. The door sagged on rusted hinges, and the air smelled faintly of mold and something metallic, like old blood. 10 minutes, Jared reminded me. "Go." I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell hit me first, musty, wet, with an undercurrent of rot. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, catching on peeling wallpaper and warped floorboards. Every step groaned under my weight. We passed the front room, where a collapsed couch sat covered in dust and mouse droppings, then entered the kitchen. That's when I noticed something strange. On the counter, in the middle of the filth and decay, sat a glass jar. Clean, untouched by dust. And inside it was something. I leaned closer, raising the flashlight. It was a tooth. Human, by the look of it. "Dude, what the hell?" Jared whispered. He sounded nervous now, like the dare had stopped being fun. But I couldn't stop staring at that jar. Who had put it there? Why was it clean when everything else in this house was rotting? Before I could think about it too much, a noise made us both freeze. Footsteps. Not the creaks of us shifting around. These were heavy, deliberate, coming from the second floor. "Someone's here," Jared hissed. His voice shook. We turned our flashlights toward the staircase at the far end of the kitchen. Dust floated in the beams like static. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking. The footsteps stopped. That silence. It was the same kind of silence I felt years later when someone stood in my parents' yard kitchen. It pressed in on you, smothering, making you painfully aware of every breath you took. We should have left. Any normal person would have bolted right then. But Jared, maybe trying to prove he wasn't scared, muttered, "Probably an animal," and started creeping toward the stairs. I didn't want to follow, but I also didn't want to be left alone in that kitchen with the jar of teeth. So I went with him. The staircase was brittle, each step whining beneath our feet. Halfway up, Jared's flashlight flickered and went out. "Not funny," he said, smacking it against his palm. But it didn't come back on. That left just my beam cutting across the dark. And that's when I saw it. At the top of the stairs, something moved. Not a person. Not exactly. It was crouched, pale skin stretched tight over bone, limbs too long for its body. Its head twitched when the light hit it, like it didn't want to be seen. For a split second, I thought I saw its eyes, milky, unfocused, yet somehow staring straight through me. Then it bolted. The sound of it scrambling on all fours across the upstairs floorboards was worse than anything I'd ever heard. "Go, go, go!" I yelled, grabbing Jared's arm. We sprinted back down the stairs, nearly tripping over each other, and crashed into the kitchen. That's when the glass jar tipped over. I don't know if it was the vibration from our footsteps or if something else had touched it, but it rolled off the counter and shattered on the floor. The tooth skittered across the tiles, stopping at my sneaker. We didn't stop to look. We tore through the front door, stumbling into the overgrown yard. My chest burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't dare slow down until we made it back to the road. Only when we stopped, gasping for air, did I look back. The farmhouse stood there, quiet, as if nothing had happened. But in the top window, I swear I saw movement, like something was standing just behind the shattered glass, watching us run. We never told my grandparents what happened. In fact, Jared and I barely talked about it with each other. It was easier to pretend we'd imagined it, that fear had twisted our brains. But 2 weeks later, when hunters passed by the Hollow House, they reported seeing faint lights glowing upstairs. No one went back inside, not after that. And me? I still remember the sound of those footsteps above me, and the way that thing moved when it crawled into the shadows. It wasn't human. It wasn't supposed to be in that house. And I can't shake the thought, maybe the house wasn't abandoned at all. I didn't go near the Hollow House again for years. But that didn't stop it from coming back to me, especially at night. Sometimes I'd wake up sweating after dreaming of those pale limbs crawling across the floorboards. Other times, I'd dream of the jar. Only in the dream there wasn't one tooth inside. It was full of them, hundreds, all rattling against the glass like chattering bones. I thought I'd left it behind. I even convinced myself it was just a trick of the light, or maybe a squatter who looked stranger in the dark than they actually were. But then, during my first year of college, something happened that made me realize the Hollow House hadn't finished with me. I came home for winter break and stayed at my grandparents' again. Jared was there too. And though we didn't talk much about that night, the silence between us said enough. We both remembered. On the second night back, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was a text from Jared. "Look outside." My heart skipped, because I knew exactly what he meant before I even pulled back the curtain. The Hollow House. From my bedroom window, I had a clear view of it in the distance across the fields. Normally it was just a dark silhouette against the night sky. But now, one of the upstairs windows glowed faintly with yellow light. It wasn't bright, more like the dim flicker of a candle, but it was there. Jared texted again. "We have to go." I wanted to tell him he was insane, that we should call someone, maybe the sheriff, or just ignore it. But deep down, I knew no one would believe us. They'd say it was kids messing around, or that we imagined it. So against every ounce of good judgment, I agreed. We snuck out through the back door with flashlights. The December air was biting cold, our breath coming out in sharp white clouds. Each step through the frost-covered grass crunched louder than it should have, like the night was warning us to turn back. The Hollow House loomed larger with every step. Its windows were black except for that one dim light upstairs, flickering like it was struggling to stay alive. When we reached the porch, Jared stopped and whispered, 10 minutes again. That's all. I nodded, though my legs felt like they were made of stone. We pushed open the door. It groaned on its hinges, the sound echoing through the empty halls. The air smelled worse than I remembered. Stale, heavy, like wet wood and rotting meat. The kitchen looked the same except the shattered jar was gone. Completely gone. Not even shards of glass left. We didn't linger. Jared led the way toward the stairs. My flashlight trembled in my hand, the beam dancing against the walls. As we climbed, I could hear something faint above us. Not footsteps this time. Humming. A low, tuneless hum that made my skin crawl. At the top of the stairs, we turned toward the room with the glowing window. The door was cracked open, the light spilling through. I whispered, "Wait!" But Jared pushed it open before I could stop him. Inside was a single candle burning on the floor. The flame wavered in the draft, casting long shadows across the peeling wallpaper. And in the middle of the room, crouched on the floor, was that same pale figure. Its back was to us, its spine arched unnaturally high, skin pulled tight over its bones. Its head twitched from side to side, like it was listening to something we couldn't hear. The humming stopped. Then, slowly, it turned its head toward us. Its mouth was wrong, stretched too wide, filled with jagged, broken teeth. But what froze me were its eyes. They weren't cloudy this time. They were black, endless. The candle went out. For a second, everything was swallowed in darkness. Then, I felt something rush past me, fast, cold, like a gust of wind with weight to it. Jared shouted, stumbling back, and I grabbed his arm as we bolted. We tore down the stairs, crashing into the walls, not caring how much noise we made. Behind us, I could hear it moving, its limbs clattering against the floorboards like some monstrous insect. We burst out the front door, into the freezing night. My lungs felt like they were on fire as we sprinted across the yard. Only when we reached the road did we dare to stop. We both collapsed, gasping, our flashlights still swinging wildly in our hands. When I looked back, the house was dark again. No light in the window, no sound, just a hollow shell staring back at us. We didn't talk on the walk back, didn't text about it afterward. But one thought burned in my mind. That thing wasn't just haunting the hollow house. It was living there, waiting, and it had seen us. To this day, when I go home to visit my grandparents, I avoid looking at the fields at night. Because sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I swear I still see a flicker of yellow light in that upstairs window. And when I do, I hear the faintest trace of humming, carried on the wind. Growing up in the countryside, I used to think the only dangers out there were coyotes, snakes, or maybe the occasional drifter passing through. But when I was 16, I learned the woods held something far stranger. Everyone in our little farming town had heard the legend of the Lantern Man. My grandfather used to tell me the story when I was younger, about a man who had been a railway worker in the early 1900s. He supposedly fell onto the tracks one foggy night and was decapitated when the train rolled by. According to the tale, his ghost still wanders the countryside holding a lantern, searching for his missing head. I always chalked it up as just one of those old ghost stories meant to keep kids from staying out late. That is, until I saw him myself. It happened one summer night after a church barbecue. My best friend Ben and I decided to walk back to my house instead of catching a ride. It was about a 2-mile walk along dirt roads, and then through a wooded trail that cut across to my family's farm. It was hot and muggy, the kind of night where crickets and frogs are deafening. We were joking around, flicking flashlights at each other, when Ben suddenly stopped walking. "Do you see that?" he whispered. Up ahead, maybe 200 yards away, there was a dim, swaying light. At first, I thought it was just another neighbor walking with a lantern or flashlight, but it moved strangely, not steady like a normal person's walk. It swung side to side, slow and deliberate, like it was floating. "Probably just old man Wheeler checking his fence," I said, though my stomach was tight. Wheeler lived on the edge of town, and I knew for a fact his house was at least a mile in the opposite direction. We kept walking, our footsteps crunching on gravel. The lantern swayed closer. By the time we reached the trail entrance, the light had disappeared. Ben laughed nervously, saying maybe we imagined it. But as soon as we stepped into the woods, the light returned, this time deeper in the trees, off to our right. It bobbed between the trunks, the faint glow cutting through the fog that had started to roll in. The crickets had gone quiet, which made every sound we made seem 100 times louder. "Okay, that's creepy," Ben muttered. I wanted to agree, but I didn't want to seem scared. It's just someone out hunting or something." "Who hunts with a lantern in July?" Ben shot back. We pushed on, flashlights cutting narrow paths through the blackness. The woods always seemed different at night, closer, heavier. Every branch snapping sounded like footsteps right behind us. Halfway down the trail, the light appeared again. Only now, it wasn't to the side. It was directly ahead, floating in the middle of the path. It swayed gently, left to right, left to right. "Who's there?" Ben shouted, trying to sound braver than he felt. His voice cracked, betraying him. No answer. The light didn't retreat. It didn't advance. It just stayed there, swaying. Ben grabbed my arm. "Let's just go back." But going back meant an even longer walk around the road, and I wasn't about to admit I was scared. "We'll just walk past. It's fine." So we did. Slowly we edged forward, flashlights shaking in our hands. As we got closer, I realized I could see more than just the lantern. There was a figure holding it. A tall man in dark, tattered clothes. His shoulders were hunched, and his head was tilted at an odd angle, like it wasn't attached right. I told myself it was just a shadow messing with me, just my brain playing tricks. But then the man lifted the lantern higher, and I saw his face, or rather, the lack of one. From the chin up, there was nothing but darkness, like someone had taken an eraser to his head. The lantern light didn't touch it. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a void. I froze. My chest locked tight. Ben whispered, "Oh my God." The lantern man tilted his faceless head at us, then started walking. But his feet didn't move like normal. He sort of glided forward, his body jerking in slow, uneven motions. The lantern swung wider now, faster, like it was excited. That was enough for me. "Run!" I shouted. We bolted down the trail, branches whipping against our faces, our flashlights bouncing wildly. Behind us, the swaying glow followed. Not fast, but steady. Always steady. I didn't dare look back until we burst out of the woods and onto the edge of my family's property. When I finally turned, the lantern was still there, hovering at the tree line, just inside the woods. It swayed side to side like it was waiting. Ben and I sprinted across the field. Didn't stop until we crashed through my front door. My parents jumped up from the couch, startled, asking what was wrong. We tried explaining, but the words tumbled out like nonsense. Faceless man. Lantern. Chasing us. My dad looked irritated, thinking we were pulling some prank. My mom, though, she went pale. "Don't go out after dark again," was all she said. We didn't, but that wasn't the last time I saw him. Sometimes, even now when I'm driving those back roads late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of a swaying light in the distance. And I'll remember that faceless figure tilting its head at me in the woods, like it was memorizing me, like it was making sure I'd never forget. For weeks after that night, Ben and I refused to walk home through the woods again. We took the long way by the road every time, even if it meant getting home late. My parents didn't question it, and my mom always gave me this look like she knew exactly why. The thing is, in a small town, word travels fast. Soon enough, kids at school started whispering about how we'd seen the lantern man. Some laughed at us. Some wanted every detail. Others got quiet, like they'd heard something similar before. That's when I realized the lantern man wasn't just some silly campfire tale. One night, maybe a month later, I was in my room trying to finish homework when I saw a glow outside. At first, I thought it was a car pulling into the driveway, but the light didn't move like headlights. It flickered and swayed. I froze, staring through the window. Across the field near the edge of the woods, I saw it. That same faint yellow glow. It bobbed back and forth, moving slowly along the tree line. My heart pounded. I yanked the curtain shut and turned off my lamp. For what felt like hours, I sat there in the dark, waiting, straining my ears. Eventually, the crickets started chirping again, and the glow was gone. I told myself I'd imagined it, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. Ben and I stopped talking about it, but it still haunted us. Every creak at night, every unexplained sound in the fields, our minds went straight to that faceless man. And then came the night we couldn't ignore him anymore. It was late August, and the county fair had just wrapped up. Ben and I got roped into helping clean up, so it was past midnight by the time we started home. His parents lived on the far side of town, so I offered to let him crash at my place. We were both dead tired, trudging down the dirt road, when we heard it. The faint clink of metal, like chains brushing together. We stopped, listening. The sound came again, from the field to our left. Then a glow appeared. The lantern. This time, it wasn't far off in the woods. It was in the middle of the field, moving toward us. Ben swore under his breath. "No way! No way!" We bolted, sprinting down the road as fast as our legs could carry us. I glanced back once, and I swear, the lantern man was closer than he should have been. He wasn't running. He wasn't even walking fast. But somehow, he was nearly keeping up. We cut through the ditch, scrambled over the fence into my yard, and tore across the grass to the porch. By the time we slammed the door shut, both of us were drenched in sweat, chests heaving. And then, knock, knock, knock. 3 slow knocks on the door. We froze. My parents had already gone to bed. No cars had pulled up. Another 3 knocks, heavy, measured. Ben whispered, "Don't open it." I didn't plan to. We just stood there in the living room, staring at the door, every nerve screaming. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the knocking stopped. But neither of us slept that night. The next morning, we found 3 black scorch marks on the wood where the knocks had been. That was the last straw. My mom finally sat me down and told me the truth. The lantern man wasn't just a story. She'd seen him when she was my age too. Back then, kids warned each other not to walk alone at night near the fields. Some believed he was the spirit of the railway worker. Others said he was something much older, tied to the land itself. "Whatever he is," she said, her face pale. "Once you see him, he doesn't forget you." Those words have never left me. Years passed. I graduated, moved out, even lived in another state for a while. I thought maybe putting distance between me and that countryside would put it all behind me. But every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of that swaying glow. Driving home late from work, or on some back road I'd never traveled before. Always distant, always just visible. Once, in the middle of the city, I looked down from my apartment window and saw it, right there in the alley below. A faint lantern glow swaying side to side, though when I blinked, it was gone. Ben never shook it either. Last I heard, he moved 2 states away, but when we talked on the phone once, his voice was tight. "You still see it too, don't you?" was all he asked. I didn't need to answer. We both knew. The lantern man doesn't belong to just one place. He follows. He waits. And the worst part? He's patient. He doesn't rush. He doesn't chase like some wild animal. He just keeps appearing, closer each time, reminding you that he's there, that he's watching, that one day, no matter how far you run, you'll see that swaying light outside your window again. And when you do, you'll know he's finally come to collect. Growing up in the countryside, there were places you just didn't go. Every kid in town had heard the rumors about the old Harper farmhouse sitting at the edge of Miller's Creek. The roof sagged, the paint had long since peeled away, and the windows were black holes staring out across the fields. People said the Harpers had vanished one winter without explanation. Plates of food still on the table, coats hanging by the door, lamps burning low. No one ever moved in after them. By the time I was in high school, the Harper place was just another part of the landscape. You'd pass it on the road, maybe throw a rock at a window, then keep walking. But late at night, the stories came back to life. Some said if you drove by slow enough, you could see movement behind the curtains. Others swore they'd heard voices, low and muffled, drifting across the fields. I never believed any of it. At least, not until the summer of my junior year. It was one of those sticky nights where sleep doesn't come easy. I'd opened my bedroom window to catch a breeze, but instead of relief, I got silence. Thick, unnatural silence. No crickets, no owls, not even the distant hum of tractors. Then I saw the glow. A soft light, pale and steady, shining from inside the Harper farmhouse. At first, I thought maybe squatters had finally moved in, but the house had no power lines running to it anymore. The electric company had cut those years ago. My stomach knotted as I leaned closer to the glass. That's when I saw movement. A figure walked past one of the windows, carrying what looked like an oil lamp. I shut my window and pulled the blinds down, telling myself it wasn't my problem. But curiosity is poison, and by the next day I couldn't stop thinking about it. I told my best friend Kyle, who immediately suggested we go check it out that night. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We set out after dark, flashlights in hand, cutting across the fields until the silhouette of the farmhouse rose in front of us. Up close, it looked even worse. Boards hanging loose, the front porch slanting downward like a broken jaw. "Bet you're too scared to go inside," Kyle teased, his grin visible even in the moonlight. I wasn't about to let him call me a coward, so we pushed open the door together. It groaned loud enough to wake the dead. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and mold. Cobwebs stretched across the corners, and the floor creaked with every step. But what struck me most was how wrong the house felt. The silence pressed against my ears, as if the walls themselves were listening. We moved through the living room, our flashlights cutting pale beams across peeling wallpaper and sagging furniture. Then we saw the dining table. 4 plates sat there, covered in a thick coat of dust, but still arranged as if the family had just stepped away mid-meal. Forks beside them, glasses half filled with something long evaporated. Kyle whispered, "Dude, that's messed up." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Then came the sound. Footsteps upstairs. Both of us froze, staring at the ceiling. Slow, deliberate steps, moving from one side of the house to the other. "Maybe it's squatters," Kyle said, but his voice shook. We edged toward the staircase, flashlights trembling in our hands. The steps stopped. Then, with a long groan, the top stair creaked, as if someone was standing right there in the shadows, waiting. My skin crawled. Everything in me screamed to run, but something pulled me forward. I took a step onto the stairs. That's when a voice whispered, clear as day, right beside my ear. "Don't go up." I spun around, but no one was there. Kyle's eyes were wide. He'd heard it too. We bolted, crashing back through the front door and tearing across the yard until the farmhouse was just a silhouette in the distance. Neither of us said a word until we were back on the road. The next morning, I told myself we'd imagined it. The footsteps, the whisper. It had to be nerves, right? But deep down, I knew better. That house wasn't empty. It never had been. And now, after stepping inside, after hearing that voice so close to my ear, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't just stumbled across the Harper farmhouse. We'd been noticed. For days after our trip to the Harper farmhouse, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in my house made me flinch. Every shadow outside my window seemed to stretch too long, linger too still. Kyle tried to brush it off, said we'd spooked ourselves, that the whisper was just the wind, but I could see it in his face. He didn't believe his own words. 2 nights later, it got worse. I was in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard it. A faint, rhythmic creak, not from inside my room, but from outside, like wood bending under weight. I froze, listening. The sound came again. Creak, pause, creak. It was coming from the porch. I killed my phone's screen and sat in the dark, heart hammering. Slowly, I slid from my bed to the window and pulled back the curtain just enough to peek outside. There it was. A shadow stood on my porch, tall and thin, facing my door. It didn't move, didn't shift, just stood there. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I backed away, every nerve in my body on fire. Then the shadow stepped forward. The porch boards groaned. It stopped in front of my door. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed, clutching it so hard my knuckles burned. My phone was on the nightstand, but I didn't dare move to grab it. All I could do was wait. Minutes passed. The shadow didn't knock, didn't try the handle, just waited. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it turned and walked off into the night. I didn't sleep at all. By morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. But when I opened the front door, I saw them, muddy footprints on the porch, leading right up to my door. I knew I had to talk to Kyle. When I found him at the gas station where he worked part-time, he looked as bad as I felt. Dark circles under his eyes, skin pale. Before I could even say anything, he muttered, "It came to my house too." That's when I realized it wasn't just me. We'd brought something back from that farmhouse. That night, Kyle and I sat in his truck, parked at the edge of the cornfield, staring at the silhouette of the Harper house. We hadn't planned on coming back, but both of us knew we had no choice. Whatever it was, it had followed us. We had to end it. The house loomed in front of us, its windows black, its roof sagging like a skull. I felt sick as we crossed the porch, remembering the whisper, the footsteps. My flashlight trembled in my hand as we stepped inside again. The air was colder this time, heavier. The dust seemed disturbed, like something had been moving around since our last visit. We went straight to the staircase, the place where we'd first heard the footsteps. The wood groaned under us as we climbed, each step a scream in the silence. At the top, the hallway stretched out in front of us, doors lining either side. My flashlight beam shook as it swept across faded wallpaper and broken picture frames. Then, from the last room at the end of the hall, came the sound of breathing. Slow, labored, inhuman. Kyle whispered, "You hear that?" I nodded, my throat too dry to answer. We edged forward, step by step, until we stood at the open doorway. My flashlight beam caught something inside. A figure, tall, thin, with skin so pale it almost glowed. Its eyes were pits of shadow, its mouth stretched into something that wasn't a smile but too wide to be anything else. It stood in the corner, facing us, as if it had been waiting all along. My chest tightened. The air grew colder, heavy, suffocating. Then it spoke, in the same whisper we'd heard before. "You shouldn't have come back." The flashlight flickered. Kyle grabbed my arm, but before we could run, the thing moved. Not walked, moved. 1 second it was across the room, the next it was inches from us, its face almost touching mine. The stench of rot filled my nose. Its breath was ice. I swung the flashlight like a weapon, the beam flashing across its pale face. For a split second, I saw its eyes, bottomless voids that seemed to pull everything into them. Then the light died. The next thing I knew, Kyle and I were outside, sprinting across the field, not daring to look back. How we got out, I don't remember. Maybe it let us go. Maybe we never really left at all. All I know is, when I finally stumbled through my front door, gasping for breath, something followed me inside. That night, as I sat on my bed gripping the bat, I heard it again. Creak. Pause. Creak. But this time, it wasn't on the porch. It was in the hallway, right outside my room. The doorknob turned, slow and steady. I shut my eyes and prayed. And when I opened them again, the door was wide open. The room was empty. But deep in the silence, I heard it. A whisper, curling through the darkness. "You brought me home."